When there is plenty, not every choice shows its true cost right away. Some choices look like gold, but they have thorns in them. In the past, someone made a simple move that sealed the future of a city, a family, and maybe even the whole world. They pointed the way forward. What would happen if a choice was made with only the eyes? What happens when the bright light of advantage makes it hard to see clearly? It is written in the dust of a rich valley and the smoke that will later cover its clouds. It was a fresh start. The flood that cleaned the earth left scars on the world. During this restart, a man named Abraham brought a promise from God. He heard from the God who rules the sky and was given a new name and a big mission. "I will make you a strong nation," the Lord said. And with those words, blessings came upon his life, making his wealth and reputation grow. Abraham wasn't walking by himself. His nephew Lot went with him and benefited from being with that lucky man. After some time, they did very well and became very wealthy. Tents were set up everywhere, and the number of herds was so great that it was hard to see. Even though there was plenty, though, conflicts grew. There were fights over water wells, greener fields, and room between the servants of both sides. The land, which used to be very big, looked small as competition grew. Because Abraham could feel the division, he did something. He didn't claim his right to be chief as patriarch. Instead, he suggested a peaceful deal. "It is not good that there should be conflict between us," he told Lot in a cool and strong voice. "Take a look around. The land is very big. Pick what you want. I'll go right if you go left. If you want to go to the right, I'll go the other way." It was more than just a polite thing to do. It showed that they were humble and trusted that God would take care of them. Their heart wasn't connected to the land, but to the promise. When Lot heard these words, he didn't think twice. He looked up at the area around the Jordan River. He saw a green valley in front of him that was full of rivers and lots of plants. He thought it was heaven. Some people said it looked like Eden or the rich lands of Egypt that were washed by the Nile. It looked appealing, like it would lead to a good life with plenty of food. But there was a quiet danger in that beauty. Lot, on the other hand, didn't notice. He picked that road because he was moved by what he saw and was sure it was the right choice. He was moving toward that wealthy land and didn't notice that the towns of Sodom and Gomorrah were almost invisible in the background. This was where evil was taking hold without being stopped. On the other hand, Abraham stayed with what Lot had left behind, lands that didn't seem to be as rich or that were harder to work on. But he wasn't looking for comfort right away. His faith was based on the promises of a God who sees beyond the scenery. So, two ways were chosen, one by looks and the other by faith. Each would go in a different direction, and soon the results would become clear. Please like this video, subscribe to our channel, and hit the bell before we go on. If you like Bible stories told with depth and feeling, thank you. Every part of this story serves a reason, and each story tells facts that change things. Also, if you want to help this work, please leave a super thank you. We can keep telling more Bible stories and spreading this message of faith and hope thanks to your gift. Thank you so much for your help. Take a deep breath and get ready. Today, let's keep going with our story. Lot got his things together, took down his tents and left Abraham for the east. Because of what he chose, he got closer and closer to the city of Sodom. He was drawn to the area like a magnet by its glitz, its tall buildings, its busy business life, and its promise of urban wealth. The land seemed to be whispering ease, growth, and plenty. He was sure he had done the right thing, so he stayed there. But behind that happy look was a deep spiritual rot. The Bible makes it clear that the people who lived in Sodom were bad, disobedient, and very hurtful to God. They had lost all sense of respect. Their wealth didn't make them kind. It made them proud and cruel. Piety had been replaced by vanity. Even the most basic values were gone in Sodom. No longer did people respect each other. It had become wrong to care about strangers, which used to be a holy thing in deserts. They didn't welcome them. Instead, they made fun of them. They didn't protect them. Instead, they hurt them. Sin was openly spread, like a river with no banks, and it was praised in public places. It became normal for people to be perverse, and things that were against the rules were seen as victories and freedom. When Lot moved to that place, he may have thought he could stay there forever, but his house was built right on the edge of a hole that no one could see. Years went by. The material comforts kept coming, but the moral cost kept going up. At the same time, Abraham kept going at a different speed, walking between God's promises and the steps of duty. He kept his tent open to the sky and his ears open for the voice of the Lord while he was on the road. He didn't look for safety in protected towns or groups of people. He was sure of himself because of the word that was given to him. He was going about his normal life when something strange happened. It was a hot day in Canaan, and the sun was high in the sky. Abraham was taking a break in the shade of a tree at the door to his tent. He saw 3 men standing in front of him when he looked up. It didn't take him long to get up and run to meet them. He acted in a strange way. He knelt down and bowed his head to the ground, as if he knew something beyond how someone looks. It seemed to him that these people were not just tourists. Something about them made them feel holy and in charge. Abraham spoke with great respect to the one who seemed to be in charge of the 3. "Sir, if I have found favor in your eyes, do not pass by without letting me serve you." In order to wash their feet, rest, and get their strength back, he asked for water and bread. It wasn't just being friendly. It was prayer in the form of service. "Do what you say," was the easy answer that showed God's acceptance. After that, Abraham quickly left. He went inside his tent and told Sarah to use the best flour to make bread. It wasn't like any other meal. It was a chance to serve something divine with the best food his house had to offer. Abraham went straight to his cows, carefully picked out a young, healthy calf, and gave it to a helper to quickly prepare. He took care of everything himself. He brought fresh milk and butter, and when the meat was done, he set everything out for his guests. He wasn't at the table. Under the tree that kept him company on hot, sunny days, he stood nearby and watched and served, paying close attention to every move. At first, it was just a normal act of kindness, but that moment was anything but normal. What looked like a simple meal for 3 travelers was actually Abraham's quiet respect for God and his servants. The father stood in front of the Most High and 2 messengers from heaven, but he didn't fully understand what was going on. And at the end of the meal, when the guests' clean feet were still covered in dust, something surprising was said. The Lord told Sarah that she would have a son within a year, even though she was very old. A promise that always comes true would make her believe after she first didn't. But soon after this message of hope, things changed. The tone became heavier and more serious. 2 of the guests got up and turned their backs on Sodom. There was a rush in their steps. They had a job to do. The 3rd person, though, stayed. Abraham kept quiet as he spoke before him out of respect. It was the Lord, the God of the promise, the one Abraham had been walking with since the promise began. His presence didn't need to be proven. It could be felt in the heart and known by trust. When God spoke, it was like a close friend telling a secret to a close friend. Not only did what he said give information, but it also showed trust and respect for this chosen man. He told Abraham that he had chosen to tell him what he was going to do. He kept an eye on the towns in the area, including Sodom and Gomorrah and the ones that were close by. It was impossible to hear the cry that came from these lands. It wasn't just rumors. It was the scream of broken lives, the smell of wrongdoing, and the weight of moral decay that would never end. There was a lot of violence. It was full of pride. Perversion was praised. The Lord said, "I will go down to see for myself," not because he didn't know anything, but to show that he was completely fair. God doesn't do things based on rumors. He does what is right. His reasoning is careful, accurate, and can't be argued with. He would agree that the cry of pain was real if it was true. He would also know if it was made up. That message was like a stone that fell on Abraham. Right away, his thoughts went to Lot, who lived in the middle of that bad society. The blood of his nephew flowed through his body. He cared even though he knew the place was dirty. The fear of destruction hung in the air like thunder that was about to break the silence. And Abraham, who had heard promises of life, now heard the news of a terrible sentence. At the same time, the sky was filled with the bright colors of dusk. The two agents left the camp of the leader and moved forward steadily. It was clear where they were going. The walls of the dirty city were getting closer. At that very moment, Lot was sitting at the door to the city, as if he was there for a reason. He stood up in a different way when he saw the two tourists. He stood up right away. They were not the same. Lot had just met the messengers who would change the course of his life forever, but he didn't know it. Lot quickly stood up when he saw the visitors coming up to the city walls. Even though he had lived in Sodom for years and been around its evil, he still had traces of an old virtue that he had learned when he walked with Abraham. He bowed his head to the ground because he saw something different in these men. Maybe the way they stood or the look of peace on their faces. In a polite but stern voice, he made a straight offer. "Gentlemen, please accept my invitation to stay at my house tonight. Take a break and wash your feet. You can keep going when the morning comes." The visitors politely said no. As was the norm for strangers, they said they would spend the night in the square. Lot knew, though, that Sodom was different from other towns. The worst parts of that place were shown by the night. He got cold when he thought about what might happen if those men stayed outside. He begged, "Don't do that," with an unusually strong voice. "Please help me. It's safe in my house. Please honor me by being here. Staying out on the streets is not safe." His plea showed that he really meant it. There was a faint light that fought against the winds of decay. When Lot insisted over and over again, they gave in. They sneaked up on him and went into his house. They were welcomed with a small feast, which was a sign of respect and welcome. Lot made bread without yeast, maybe because he was in a hurry or because he was religious. The dinner was simple, but it meant a lot. But what seemed like a calm night was broken by a growing noise outside. Quickly, word got around that the strangers had arrived. Soon, the men of Sodom began to gather, as if the whole city was filled with sin. The crowd quickly grew with people coming from everywhere. Everyone, young and old, was there. It was like the whole community had a sick urge. People were all around Lot's house. The night was filled with the sound of loud bangs. A chorus of voices called for something that couldn't be named. They yelled Lot's name in a hurried and angry way. "Where are the men who came in here tonight?" was their clear, straight and shady request. "Get them out, we'd like to know them." But the way that crazy crowd used the word "no" didn't leave any room for innocent readings. It was a mean-spirited code word that meant to hurt and embarrass. No one was being humble, not honorable at all. It proved in real life what God had told Abraham hours before. The cries of Sodom were not exaggerated. It was the most wicked place on earth. Now that they were in front of the angels, the men of the city proved what had been said in front of the holy throne. When Lot was by himself in that crowd, he felt tremendous stress. His job as a host clashed with the horror of what was going on. The real danger was at odds with the idea of being friendly that he had learned in the desert. The guests from heaven had come not only to look, but also to watch. The city was starting to show why it was marked for judgment on its own. The crowd in front of Lot's house was no longer trying to hide what they were up to. They wanted more than just sex. They wanted to control, shame, and destroy the guests' sense of self-worth. All of them wanted to make them into icons of how weak they were, which was an act of violence, abuse, and insult. At that moment, Sodom showed the pit it had fallen into without any masks. Lot made a hasty choice because he felt he had to protect his guests, but was also afraid of being smashed by the crowd. He carefully closed the door behind him as he left, trying to protect the people who lived under his house. He spoke to the crowd in a shaking but strong voice. "Please, my brothers, don't do such a horrible thing. Do not do this bad thing." But what came next would shock even the most understanding hearts. Lot offered to make an impossible sacrifice because he was hopeless and morally confused from living in that city for so long. He said, I have 2 daughters who have never been with a man. I'll get them for you. Do what you want with them. Do not touch these guys, though. They're safe in my house right now. It was a very scary idea, and it showed how the setting in Sodom had messed up even a man who had learned the ways of justice in a past life. His words didn't come from being cold. They came from a complete need to be heard. This action, even though it was done out of a false sense of safety, showed how much Lot had already let a broken moral system control him. What the crowd did was very angry. They were not happy with the offer. On the contrary, it made them even more angry. They did not want other people to do it. They were not willing to put up hurdles. They became angry at those mystery men because they seemed to make them feel more than just desire. They were angry and yelled at Lot, "Get out of the way! Who are you to tell us what to do? You are not from here, and now you want to be a judge. Now we'll treat you worse than we treated them." The anger turned into rage. The crowd charged at Lot, pushing him, yelling at him, and slamming the door in a mean way. It was their plan to break in, break everything, and destroy everything they found. As if it had only been a moment, it looked like everything was over. The force of the hits made the house shake. It was impossible to hear the screams. But just as the darkness got the worst, help arrived. The 2 visitors did things from inside the house. They reached out and pulled Lot inside with uncanny accuracy. They then shut the door with a force that no man could match. At the same time, the angels gave a partial sentence, which is also known as an instant ruling. The men at the door, from the oldest to the youngest, all went blind, all at once. It could have been a light they couldn't stand, or an unseen fog that made it hard for them to see and think. From one second to the next, they were moving slowly, confused and lost, and they had no idea what had happened. The crowd went crazy. They tripped over each other, yelled in shock, and looked everywhere but the entry they could no longer see. What had been a group of violent people turned into a tornado of fear. It was clear from the sky that we no longer had time to wait, and Sodom felt the weight of punishment coming on for the first time. People who had been filled with animalistic rage and twisted wants moments before were now groping around aimlessly, tripping over each other because they felt useless and empty. The same people who had fought so hard to get into Lot's house were now desperately bumping into each other as they looked for a door they couldn't see. Not only did the angels' blindness hurt people physically, it was also a sign of how spiritually dark that city had been for a long time. The attack was over. Lot was kept safe. But that action wasn't the end. It was just the start of carrying out a decision that had been put off for a long time. The agents from the Most High came down with a clear goal. They weren't just there to watch, they were there to act. When there was silence again in the house, the angels told the truth without holding back. It was time to go. There was no more time. They asked in a firm voice, "Lot, do you have anyone else in this city? Close cousins like sons-in-law, sons, daughters, or other close relatives? Get them all out of here. This place is going to fail. God sent us to destroy it." The message was very clear. It was neither a warning nor a chance for the future. It was too late to turn back to God. It was time to get away. When Lot realized how bad things were, he went right out to find the men who were engaged to his daughters. He quickly knocked on their doors, his eyes wide and his voice wailing with pain. "Get up! Get away! Get out of here! Jehovah is the one who will destroy everything." He talked like someone who was hiding a terrible secret and trying to stop a tragedy that was about to happen. But the answer was laughter. Young men who would become his sons-in-law, who may have been affected by the bitter and haughty spirit of Sodom, did not believe a word he said. They thought Lot was crazy. They made fun of his shaking voice and laughed in his face. "Destruction? What a load of crap, Lot. Are you crazy? Sleep." For them, it was all made up. There was no fire. The fall wasn't marked by any signs. The city was quiet and stuck in its bad habits. Lot came home broken-hearted. He held the pain of someone who had tried to help others but been turned down. The young guys who could have become part of his family turned down their last chance. The sky was getting lighter outside. There wasn't much time left. And the angels rushed Lot because they knew that judgment was coming soon. "Get up, take your girls and your wife right now. Get out of there before you get punished." So Lot was still not sure. His heart was mixed up and his mind was split. Maybe he didn't want to give up everything he had worked so hard on. He might have been afraid of the unknown. He might have been frozen with fear. The truth is that he gave up even after clear and obvious signs. He didn't move for a moment that could have been fatal. However, mercy still reached out. When the angels saw that he didn't want to go, they took him by the hands. They also took his wife and 2 kids and pulled them away. It came from heaven and was an act of kindness. In his kindness, God chose not to wait any longer for people to make choices. The end was already close, and there was only one way to stay alive: leave right away. The city was still asleep and didn't know about the sealed sentence. But that day's dawn would not bring light. It would make fire. Even with all the warning signs and help from God, Lot was still not sure. The Bible says that he paused, and that lingered said a lot. He might have been so shocked that he couldn't understand how important what was happening. It could have been fear of the unknown, but there was something else that stopped him. He still had some of his heart in Sodom. He had built a good life for himself there, with his houses, belongings, status, and ease. Now everything had to be left behind and could never be found again. Being unable to make a choice at that very important time could have cost him his life. There was not much time left for forgiveness. Soon justice would come down in full force. They did something when they saw that Lot and his family weren't going on their own. There was no reason for Lot to deserve it. It was because God was merciful, and that kindness came from remembering the promise he made with Abraham. The angels took Lot by the hand right away. They also took his wife and 2 children. Without asking, they pulled them away from the land that was marked to be destroyed. They were already outside the city limits when dawn started to paint the eastern sky gray. They were saved physically. They didn't have a choice. Outside, where there was still danger, one of the angels gave clear directions. There was no time to argue or make a mistake. "Run for your lives! Do not turn around. In the plain, don't stop anywhere. Get up to the mountains. That's the only way to avoid death." It was the very last step. Okay, easy and strict, but Lot spoke out because he was still scared and unsure. His heart was racing, and he couldn't accept the idea of running to a hilly area he didn't know about. He thought about the risks of the road, being alone, being hungry, and the risks that were hard to see. And in a hurry, he came up with an option. "Please don't, my Lord. Look, I've found favor in your eyes. My life has been saved, but I can't get to the mountain. I'm going to die on the way." Then, pointing to a small town nearby that didn't seem important, he begged, "See that one there? It's not nearly as big. Let me run away there. It's only a village. I'll be okay. Please, let me go there." The angel responded with patience that was beyond human levels. "Okay, I will do what you ask. We will not destroy that city for your sake." The surrender wasn't made because it was easy, but because it was the right thing to do. Another message from God said, "Run there now. Quickly. I can't do anything until you're inside safely." There was a strong truth that was hidden in these words. God's wrath was about to fall, but one man was stopping it. Before anything else could start, Lot had to be saved. It looked like heaven was holding its breath, ready for the last soul to find safety. A warning that kindness still looked for a way to act, even when justice was about to happen. So, the fate of 2 whole cities depended on one man's quick step toward a town that was too small to be remembered, but big enough to become a sign of God's love. Zoar is the name of the small town. In Hebrew, it means not important. But on that day, its small size belied the huge part it played. It was the last place people could go before the skies opened up and judged them. While Lot and his family ran, out of breath and tired, toward the city, dawn broke over the horizon. Finally, the sun broke through the clouds and hit the land. That's when everything changed. As soon as Lot got to Zoar, where he was safe, judging began. The Lord himself sent a miraculous storm over Sodom and Gomorrah and the whole plain. It was a rain of fire and sulfur. What used to be a fertile valley with lots of green fields and groups of sheep was now a scene of complete destruction. Nothing got away, not a man, woman, or child. There was not a single tree, flower, or seed growing from the ground. What people had hoped would be heaven was now just ashes and quiet. It was a complete disaster, a decision that won't bend. The Eternal's anger did not come quickly, but at the perfect time after many chances to change their minds. Now that the cup of sin was full, justice was poured out without holding back. For all time, it was a clear sign that the Most High would never ignore evil and pride. But even in the middle of running away and being saved, one disobedient act changed the course of a life. It was clear that Lot's wife shouldn't look back, but she did anyway and looked at the city. No one knows for sure why she did what she did, but it had an immediate effect. It could have been sadness over all she was losing. It could have been doubt. It could have been a simple emotional connection to something she still loved deeply. It didn't matter. One look sealed her fate. Her body changed at that very moment. She turned into a salt column. She stood there still, stuck between what was and what would never be again. An endless warning that was built in the middle of nothingness to show that spiritual hesitancy in the face of judgment can be just as deadly as staying in error. Her name will be forgotten, but what she did will always serve as a lesson to future generations. At the same time, the early morning light reached the hills far away, where another man was waking up. Abraham got up early because he was still thinking about what he had said to God. He went back to the spot where he had stood before the Lord and yearned for Sodom with bravery and kindness. He waited there, maybe still holding out hope. He looked up. From afar, he could see the plain that used to be full of life, but all that was seen now was smoke. A thick, dark column rose like steam from a very large boiler. The ground was on fire. It looked like the sky was closed. What he saw was the sentence being carried out. There had been no escape from judgment. There was no longer any cities. Nothing could be done by Abraham. Even though he prayed, the decision did not change. As always, though, God had heard his friend's cries. Lot had been kept safe. Even though the valley was in ruins, God's plan was still in place. The ground shook that day, but events would go on, and fire could never erase the Lord's loyalty. There was not a single good person in the people of Sodom and Gomorrah, not even 10. Yet even though he was looking at a terrible scene, Abraham couldn't turn away from a truth that made him feel better. Because the Bible says that when God judged those towns, he thought of Abraham. The Lord didn't forget the promise he made to his helper. He also didn't erase the honest prayer Abraham had offered days before. The reverent and brave talk that day did not go to waste. And because God loved Abraham even though he didn't earn it, not because of what Lot did, his nephew was miraculously pulled out of the fire and saved. Lot's rescue wasn't a prize for his shaky faith or questionable goodness. Why did it happen? Because God was true to the person he called his friend. Meanwhile, Lot was safe inside the walls of the small city of Zoar, but he didn't feel at peace inside. He was plagued by the same worry that kept him from fully trusting that he would be saved. His heart was still shaking at the thought that that place could also be destroyed. He might have seen Zoar as an extension of the cursed plain, or he might have felt like he was the only survivor in a room full of people who didn't understand how terrible what he had seen was. The truth is that he was scared again. It was this fear that made him change his mind. He left Zoar and went to the mountains. He and his 2 girls ran away to a cave that was far from people, society, safety, and comfort. He moved into that cold, dark cave and made it his home. He had gotten away from the fire, but now he had to deal with the pain of being alone, the lack of hope, and the stress of leaving everything behind. The only sound in that lonely haven was the wind blowing through the rocks, and it became so quiet that it was hard to think straight. Even after Sodom was destroyed, memories of it still rang in the darkness. Even though the city had fallen apart, the atmosphere that had shaped the morals of those young women had not gone away. It was still there, in their minds and in their beliefs. Since Lot's daughters were living in a world with no points of reference, they made a stupid choice. They came up with an insane plan because they were afraid that their family would die out, and they didn't believe that they would find men or that God would still find a way. They decided to get their father drunk and lay with him one by one because they thought the world had ended, or maybe they were choosing to believe this to make what they were doing okay. The idea came from a need to survive, but it was also driven by a secret from the society they had left behind. Even in the ashes, the evil of Sodom still tainted their decisions. They didn't ask for help or wait for God to step in, but instead they gave in to the bad thinking of a past that they hadn't fully left behind. There was pain, misunderstanding, and a lack of faith in what was done. The Most High sees everything, but that dark night in the cave showed something that not even a destroyed city could hide. People need to be saved right away. Lot's oldest daughter went into the dark cave, which was far from any town, temple, or altar, and told her younger sister about a scary plan. Our dad is old, and this is where we are. There is no man who can marry us, which was the norm everywhere. Our family will leave with him if we don't do anything. Hopelessness was stronger than reason. They had lost their faith and came up with a bad idea instead. Their thinking was skewed by recent pain and the effects of the past. The idea was simple, but it would have long-lasting effects. Let's drink him up. He'll be forced to drink wine until he loses it. After that, one of us will lie down with him. In that case, at least his line will not go out. It was twisted reasoning that seemed to come from a desire to do what is right, but it was really based on not trusting God. In those words, there was a mix of despair, trauma, and the effect of being exposed to the evil of Sodom for a long time, which tainted their morals. So they went ahead with their plan. On the first night, they drank Lot so much that he lost touch with reality. The eldest daughter laid down with him while he was asleep. They did the same thing again the next night, but this time it was the younger daughter's turn. Lot had no idea when his daughters came up to him or when they left. He could not control how the wine made him feel. Both girls got pregnant through these sexual relationships. The oldest had a son, whom she named Moab. Those who came after him would be called Moabites. The youngest one had another boy, and she named him Ben-Ami. He was the father of the Ammonites. Two countries would grow up next to Israel and have wars, partnerships, and high levels of tension with each other throughout history. What was done in that cave wasn't just a mistake for a short time. It grew roots. It had effects that went on for generations. It showed that even though they had gotten away from Sodom's physical punishment, its morals were still inside them. Their divine rescue had reached them, but they had not yet changed on the inside. Sodom's heritage lived on, but not in stones or fires. It lived on in choices and children and grandchildren. Still, God let these countries grow. He would even use the Moabites in a strange way later on in history. Someone of them would have a daughter named Ruth. Because she was so faithful, God would love her and put her in line with the Messiah. Even if God's kindness was hurt, it would still work in strange and healing ways. The story of Sodom and Gomorrah is more than just a sad story of destruction. It's a word that lives on, that proves God's wrath doesn't come quickly, but it is complete when it does. His holiness can't be argued with. He doesn't close his eyes to evil that doesn't stop, is rude, or wants to change. But this story also shows another truth. The Lord is kind. When people truly call out for him, he hears them. He hears prayers for help. He saves people who are weak, unsure, or flawed. With his strong faith, Abraham asked for fairness and kindness. God heard him. Lot wasn't saved because he was strong or trustworthy. He was saved because of a promise made by a friend of God who cared. This story ends somewhere between judgment and kindness, between death and life. Everlasting proof that we all still have to decide whether to look back or move forward. One thing stands out clearly throughout this story: God's kindness. The universe's God is seen by us not only as a judge, but also as a father who listens, thinks, and acts. He agreed to talk to Abraham, thought about his requests, and then showed Abraham his heart. He was ready to spare whole towns for the sake of 10 good people. He looked for them but couldn't find them. Still, he was kind and reached out to Lot. Even though he was weak, hesitant, and making risky deals, God saved Lot as an act of kindness, not as a prize for his good behavior. But there's a message in this story too. A sign as bright as fire on a hill that tells us not to ignore the risks of getting used to being bad. Lot decided to live near beautiful things, but he forgot to look at what was growing in the middle of the land. He moved to the plain because it looked fertile and hopeful, so he hung out with bad people. Over time, he didn't realize it, but he took on their values and lost his sense of right and wrong, ruined his home, and hurt his family's reputation. The outcome was terrible. She broke his rules and died. Because of the moral chaos in Sodom, his daughters did one of the worst things ever written about in the Bible, and Lot himself vanished from history as a man who had been judged and was now alone, traumatized, and unable to speak. The fact that his wife turned into a rock of salt means that she will always be a sign of judgment and warning. A scary warning of what it means to love the world more than what God wants. It can cost you everything to look back when heaven says go, and that warning is still there in the pages that come after. In his second letter, Peter reminds the Christians that God burned down Sodom and Gomorrah to show them what happens when people are bad. But at the same time, he saved the good man Lot, who was upset about the bad behavior of those around him, 2 Peter 2, 6-7. Jude also stresses how serious the sentence is by saying that those places will always be a warning because they will be burned down forever. Jude 1:7. In Matthew 10:15, Jesus Christ himself talked about the coming judgment and said that it would be easier on Sodom than on those who refused to follow him. And he told us straight out, remember Lot's wife. Luke 17:32. This story wasn't written down just to amaze us or make us feel smart by telling us about the past. We are faced with it. Our comfort level is shook up by it. It's an urgent call to turn away from our sins, think deeply about the choices we've made, and to seek shelter not in caves or safe cities, but in the heart of God, which is the only place where we can be saved. Abraham had his feet on the ground and his eyes on heaven. We are asked to do the same. Apart from the bad things going on around us, but with hearts that pray for those who are lost. We're told to run away from the bad things going on around us, and even worse, the bad things inside us. We shouldn't long for things that the Lord has already told us to leave behind. We shouldn't love things that heaven has already said are bad. This story does end with a verdict, yes, but it ends on a hopeful note, because God's kindness was shown even when things were falling apart. And it is still being shown to us through Jesus Christ. He is the real safe place. The only place that will be safe when the fire goes out. He is the link between virtue and guilt. Those who believe in him can not only escape, but also live forever. Feel free to share this story with someone who also needs to remember that God is still fair and love. Say amen in the comments, click like, and stick around on our channel. We will keep learning about how God's love can save us, even in the worst situations, and give us hope when it seemed like all hope was lost. Thank you for following us to the end of this incredible story. See you in the next video. May God be with you always. Amen.